Good afternoon. I'm Nicola Palfrey and welcome to the broadcast. I hope you're all joining us from across the country and having a lovely day. My name is Nicola Palfrey. I'm the National Clinical Manager at Headspace Schools and I'll be facilitating this discussion this afternoon. If you're attending this webinar live this afternoon, you'll be getting a certificate of participation shortly after this. This will come in your inbox in the next week or so, and you'll also receive the certificate that you can download within the email. You will also be able to get an email with the resources that have been shared today. So any of the links and additional information resources that the panel mentioned will be sent out to you. You'll also get a recording of the session as well as some Q&As. We've received thousands of registrations for today's webinar. We had to lock it out, unfortunately, at 2,500 registrations, so shows the interest in this topic. However, there will be a recording, as we said, available for those that have registered and can't come today, or if you want to share it with your colleagues. There will also be lots of questions that have come through in the registration that can come through in the Q&A section today. We will try to group them together and get through as many of them as we can. However, those that we don't get through, we will send out a Q&A sheet afterwards as well to hopefully address those. There isn't a chat box in today's webinar, which might be a bit unusual, but you can submit your questions through the Q&A manager, and we'll be sorting through those and feeding them through to the panelists as we go in today. If you've already submitted a question when you registered, there's no need to resubmit it. I've got them all listed here, the hundreds and hundreds of them that have come through, so we'll do our best to get through those. And yeah, let's get on with it. So first of all, I would like to start off with acknowledgement of country. So I would like to say hello to you from the lands on which I'm joining, which is the Ngunnawal lands, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also want to welcome you from wherever you are joining us today across the country. We know we've got participants from all over the country, and we want to acknowledge the contribution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and traditions lend in this space. So let's get into it and introduce you to our panelists. All of our panelists this evening are part of Headspace Schools BU initiative. So as I mentioned, I'm Nicola Palfrey, I'm the National Clinical Manager, and now I'm going to introduce you and invite on stage, so to speak, the members of our panel, Hannah Jamison, Meg Cautery and Paula Henderson. So welcome, ladies, who have been stressing out by not being able to get online until 2 minutes before the webinar. So welcome. I'm going to go left to right from how I see it. You actually matched the screen, which is perfect. So I'll ask you ladies to introduce yourself. So Hannah, do you mind kicking us off?
Hi everybody, my name's Hannah Jamison. I'm based in Victoria. It's lovely to be with you. I have previously been an educator for over 15 years working in secondary schools.
Thanks Hannah, welcome, and welcome to Meg.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Meg Cautery. I'm located in Queensland in our Brisbane office. I'm clinical lead for Queensland and I'm a social worker by background. Most of my professional career has been working in youth mental health. So first of all in the Headspace Centre network with direct practice, and now in the Headspace Schools division. Thanks for having me.
Thanks Meg, great to have you along, and welcome Paula.
Hi everyone. My name's Paula. I'm actually joining you from Perth this afternoon. Nice and sunny outside my window, which is lovely. I am the clinical lead for Western Australia and my background is occupational therapy. So I've worked as a mental health occupational therapist for a number of years across all different age groups, but I did also spend some time working for eHeadspace. So I feel like I've got a little bit to contribute to this topic. So look forward to the discussion this afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of you for participating, and I think it's really helpful to have those different perspectives from different backgrounds, direct client service delivery, working in schools as educators and clinicians. So we'll be picking your brains, and I very unkindly when we're putting this together, I asked Hannah, Meg and Paula if they would mind pulling the rug out and kind of doing it Q&A style, because I think it's more interesting, and you also have a wealth of knowledge and discussion. Often leads to really rich conversations, I think. So there's been hundreds and hundreds of questions, as I said, but there's some really key veins running through those questions. So hopefully we will get through them today. So before we kick off, I really just want to take a moment to make sure that we recognise that as we're going into a topic such as self-harm, it's really important that we take notice and care of ourselves and others. So I want, just before we launch into it today, for you to think about what are you going to do for yourself. Whenever we speak about adversity, difficulties, mental health issues, we all come with our own lived experiences in life, whether it's personally, professionally, or in the broader family or friends network. So I encourage you all to think about what you can do to look after yourself. If you need to step out at any point, please do so. If you want to take a little break and not return, you can do that. You'll get the recording. So please, I encourage you to look after yourself. I just wanted to double check that we've had some feedback about the sound. Can somebody pop some feedback through the Q&A whether or not sound is coming through okay? That would be awesome. Thank you very much. So creating a safe, inclusive space, just following on from that, there is always support available. We spend a lot of our lives as educators or health professionals, clinicians, thinking about the wellbeing of others. So I encourage you all to think about yourself and the resources that are available for yourself and your colleagues as well. If something that we're going to discuss today, we never know. That's the thing. We might think we're fine, we're in a great space to have this conversation, we're really interested, and we never really know when we might get upset, distressed, triggered by something that's talked about. And there's no shame in that. We always encourage help seeking in others. So I'd ask you to extend the same to yourself. Sounds like everything's okay with sound, which is awesome. Thank you. So BU. So BU is a national initiative funded by the Commonwealth Department of Health. It's led by Beyond Blue, and we're one of the proud delivery partners as Headspace Schools alongside Early Childhood Australia. And really our business is to work with learning communities and schools to support and promote the mental health and wellbeing of children and young people. As Headspace Schools, we work in the primary and secondary school settings, and the work that we do is always based on the latest and best evidence. It includes online professional learning for educators in the space, also tools and resources to implement a whole learning community to mental health and wellbeing. And we also have a team of amazing consultants, as you'll hear from today. So they are located and based across the country in every state and territory. So if you haven't linked in with your local BU consultant or team, we encourage you to look that up and reach out to us after today. So the vision is very simple, that for every Australian early learning service and school is positive, inclusive, resilient community where every child, young person, educator and family can achieve their best mental health. So it's a straightforward mission, as you know. It's not easy to achieve, particularly when you've had the couple of years that we've had here, well, globally really, but certainly in Australia, we've had the full gamut of the kind of adversities that natural disasters, economic issues, family breakdown, pandemics, all of it. And I think it's fair to say that we're all aware and cautious about the impact of that on the young people and children in our lives, as well as our peers, colleagues as well. So today, without further ado, I think it is good to see what we're going to cover this afternoon. So let's get into our learning objectives for this afternoon. So as a clinician myself, having worked in headspace centres, private practice and in health settings, work with a lot of young people who engage in self-harming behaviours of all types. And this first question, why on earth do they engage in it, is something that puzzles a lot of adults, and so we're going to try and unpack that a little bit and try and understand what's behind the behaviour that these children and young people are engaging in. We look at some of the myths surrounding self-harm, unpack them, dissect them, and actually have an honest discussion about it. Look at strategies, obviously, what can we do about it if we're worried about a young person who we suspect or we know is engaging in self-harming behaviours in the school setting. And really importantly, look at the impact on educators of managing these behaviours. So hopefully we'll get that triangulation of what's going on for the young person, for families, and for the adults in their lives that are supporting them. So just before we start, there's a lot of language around all mental health issues, but particularly self-harm. So when we're talking this afternoon about self-harm, we're talking about people deliberately hurting their bodies. It's usually done in secret and on places not seen by others. So top of the thighs, arms, those sorts of things, where people are doing it in private, and their aim is certainly not for others to become aware of this behaviour. The most common type of self-harm is cutting. I'm sure everyone's heard of or experienced evidence of other people engaging in this behaviour, but there's many other types of self-harm. We had a number of questions about this before in the registration. What does it include? So for the purposes of this, we're thinking about these common types of self-harm: cutting, burning, punching, hitting themselves, picking skin or sores, kind of deliberately causing harm to themselves. We could widen the definition if we wanted to. I think we all engage in self-harming behaviours at some times when we're stressed. It might be spending too much money, or drinking too much, or engaging in risky behaviours. But for the purpose of this afternoon, we're talking about this kind of deliberate hurting of oneself and one's body. You may also have heard of the term NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury. It's a clunky term, but it's actually probably what we're talking mostly about today, is an act to harm oneself without the intent to die. So it's not a suicide attempt. It is usually to reduce uncomfortable or distressing emotions, and it can be repetitive in nature. So it's an act in and of itself, the end product not being an attempt on your life. It often is referred to as self-harm or deliberate self-harm, but we just wanted to clarify today, when the panel are talking about self-harm, we're talking about NSSI as distinct from suicide attempts. We may have some space to have a look at a little bit of the discussion around the distinction between that, or the link, but we probably won't go too far down this path because there's so much to unpack as it is in the session today. Okay. I think we are right to go. So I'm going to welcome back our panel. So I'm Nicola, as I said. I'm going to welcome back Hannah, Meg, and Paula. And as I said, that the aim for this afternoon, when we're pulling this together, we obviously within BU do professional learning ourselves. We try to keep ourselves across all the topics, the emerging topics, the latest evidence-based, the practices, what the consultants are seeing in schools, what educators are reporting, what the centres, headspace centres, for example, are talking about. And self-harm is definitely the topic of the year, I would say. It's something that is coming through time and time again that educators are really worried about. The other thing I wanted to say up front is we are well aware of the concern around primary school age students, and there was a lot of questions about that. So we will be covering off that to some extent in the session today as well. But we're going to start relatively broadly, and I'm going to throw to Meg first of all, if that's okay, Meg. There's lots of myths about self-harm. It seems like lots of things in the mental health space, but particularly self-harm, it is fraught with myths and misconceptions. I was wondering if you could kick us off by introducing us to some of the myths and dispelling them, confirming them, taking us through them.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Nicola. You've touched on at least one of them in the description of self-harm, and that was around that it, I guess, is a suicide attempt. But there are some other common ones, and I'll touch on just a couple of those. So the first is attention seeking, that it's simply attention seeking, and the other is that it's maybe a phase or a trend. So with regards to attention seeking, and we did explore this a little bit in that previous slide, but basically self-harm is a personal act, and it's most often done in private. It's also done to parts of the body that are often hidden and not visible. We also know that the most common reason people give for self-harm is actually to be able to cope with either painful experiences or psychological distress. So in saying that, most people engage in self-harm to change how they were feeling rather than to draw attention from others. Research does show that there is a small percentage of people who do report their aim is to elicit a response from others. Essentially though, I see this as help seeking. And for some young people, self-harm might be the most successful strategy that they have found to elicit support and help from others. What I would say is all self-harm should be taken seriously, and it should be treated as an opportunity to start a dialogue with a young person, have a chat about what's going on for them, what are their positive coping strategies, and what are their key supports. In terms of it being a phase or a trend, there's actually no evidence to suggest that self-harm is associated with any particular trend. It can and does occur in people of all ages, socioeconomic status, ethnicities. It is true, though, that it's more common in young people. It's really important not to trivialise or dismiss the behaviour as a phase or a trend, and to say, oh, they're an adolescent, you know, we can expect this. It's also equally important that young people know if they choose to disclose self-harm, they will receive a compassionate and an informed response. The alternative can very possibly create a negative association with help seeking, and that can have lifelong impacts. In terms of suicide attempt, which is the last one we mentioned, this one's probably what frightens people the most, is the assumption that a young person is attempting to end their life. In the majority of cases, we know that this is not true. Actually, the opposite is true. Self-harm for many people is a way to cope with daily challenges and a way to stay alive. It can be for some a way to gain a sense of control or to feel connected into what's real. I do want to acknowledge, though, that there's a real risk of inflicting more serious injury than intended. And it is important also to highlight that self-harm is a significant risk factor for suicide. So really important that we do a thorough risk assessment for any young person who is self-harming, and that we use direct questioning to assess for suicidal thoughts. Finally, I just wanted to add that it's touching on these myths is really important because there's a lot of stigma and shame around self-harm, and actually these can contribute to or be a driver, I guess, of efforts to keep the behaviour hidden. So the more that we can educate ourselves around what is self-harm and how can we provide an informed response, the better.
Meg, that's fantastic. I have so many little questions pinging off of my head. I'm going to get you to elaborate on a couple of key points, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm just wanting you to unpack a little bit for the audience. So we've said that self-harm can be kind of the opposite to suicidal attempt, i.e. it's helping people feel contained and alive, but then we say it's a risk factor for suicide. So can you kind of just unpack that a little bit for me? So how they kind of can be associated but aren't associated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not a causal relationship, and what I mean by that is just because somebody is engaging in the behaviour of self-harm does not mean that they are necessarily experiencing suicidal thoughts or that they will one day take their life. We all have risk factors. That's the reality. Is in terms of our history and our current circumstances, there will be risk factors for all of us.
Okay, so that's why risk assessment is really important. So whilst we can't assume that it is, we can't assume that it isn't either. So we want to kind of go through and unpack it with a young person. That's right. Really helpful. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on is it works, doesn't it? Like the people engage in it because it helps. I think that's what's so counterintuitive. Often to adults, and I'm 50, adults of my generation. I think I was sharing this with you guys. When I was at uni, my uni supervisor was doing their PhD on self-mutilation, and the only population 25 years ago that engaged in self-mutilation, as it was called, was the male prison population. So over the last couple of decades, it's gone from being an behaviour in an extreme setting to a mainstream behaviour. So I think that's often what some of the real confusion is, because we don't have a lot of parents of adolescents don't have we did that at our age. Not like they got drunk in the park or they might have tried smoking or something like that. So, but it does work. You were mentioning there's good reasons for kids doing it, isn't there?
Yeah, look, it's a coping strategy. It's a behaviour. It's something. It's. I guess we might, in a clinical sense, call it maladaptive, but it's a coping strategy. And so the idea is, if that's working for them in that moment, it's not advised that we would ask a young person to cease self-harming immediately if we were to find out they were doing that, because unless we're able to equip them with other helping coping strategies to get through the challenges they face, we may be taking away something that is vital for their life.
It's a really good point, and that's a hard thing, I think, for people to hear sometimes, that we're kind of not trying to squish it straight away. It leads on really nicely, Hannah. I'd like to jump to you if that's okay. Thank you, Meg. That was an awesome way to kick us off. Meg is talking there specifically, once you start working with a young person clinically, you kind of understand the purpose of the self-harm, what other strategies they might have to manage what self-harm is, handling for them. But what's an educator's role in this space? If they are concerned about a young person, if they are disclosed to or they suspect that they are engaging in self-harming behaviours, what's the role of an educator?
I think there's some really interesting points there, and I think it's really important to acknowledge for educators that self-harm can feel is really confronting, particularly when in a classroom setting you're trying to manage a diverse group of young people. You might have concerns about whether that young person has told their friends or whether other people have seen it, and I think that's something we'll touch on soon. I want to really highlight for educators, you are part of a management plan with this young person. You're not the sole person to do this. So I really want to encourage educators to know that it wouldn't be and shouldn't be expected that you're the only person that to manage this distress with this young person. So, you might have heard when Meg said, okay, we're not stopping it immediately. You might think, oh my goodness, this is something now I have to hold. It's not, that you're part of a larger plan. From an educator's perspective, I'd really encourage you to see, if we go back to what, our teaching practice, the self-harm is a behaviour. The self-harm is not a mental illness in and of itself. So it's around, like with every other behaviour we'd see in the classroom, there's a message behind that behaviour. What is the message that behaviour is trying to tell us? One of the things I'd really encourage you to think about is, as you develop a management plan with your young person, as you're part of developing, the management plan around supporting a young person who's in distress, is to really think about your own reactions. Quite often I know that we want to, and I was really, Meg, I was so glad that you said that about, how do we ask a young person to stop this, is quite often as a teacher, the first thing is, we don't want any harm to come to our kids. We have a duty of care. And so it's around making sure that you're keeping the young person safe while they're in your class, while they're in your care, but that there is a limit to that. That it really is about, yes, you should be available to support your young people, but that there is a limit. You set a limit around your availability, and that outside of that time where your duty of care extends, that there's someone else to take that on board, whether that be clinicians, parents, carers, whoever that might be as well. I think some of the things as well, and Meg and Paula, feel free to jump in here, is that quite often there can be some shame around, from a young person's perspective, around whether they've self-harmed. And so I think it's really important from an educator's perspective that we don't add to that shame. We're not layering on that shame by being angry. What did you do that for? That kind of really questioning, where we're trying to make sense of it ourselves, aren't we? We want to understand, it seems sometimes for some people who may not have experienced it, it might seem really counterintuitive that a young person would want to hurt themselves. And so it's really important that we don't come at this situation, and I know I'm conscious this is much more easily said than done, but that you don't come at it with anger or a sense of, why are you doing this? Because like with a lot of young kids in our classroom, they may not be able to tell us why. They may not have the language to tell us why. And so I try and see the self-harm as a message. It may not be directed to us, but there's something behind that. And I'd really encourage you to come at this being really gently curious around what part do I have, what small part or what part in this do I have in helping that young person be able to communicate better around their distress and their pain.
Hannah, the single biggest question we had out of the hundreds was what to say. What does an educator say? Have you got any tips on kind of actual language? We're kind of
Yeah,
not coming at it with the distress or even noticing it or catching yourself if you're feeling
yeah.
like
I think
I'm worried for you. But what can you say? What could an educator say to
Yeah,
a young
okay. First things first, before you say anything, I think is no matter how much you're freaking behind the scenes, is try and appear calm, which can be, it's the duck above the water sort of thing. Something around, I think acknowledgement is really powerful. This young person has felt, for better or worse, whether you've noticed it or they've told you, there is this little opportunity in time to at least acknowledge pain. And so it could be something along the lines of, I can see that this seems to, I'm sorry that this has hurt you, or this that looks painful. An acknowledgement, or thank you that you've felt safe enough to tell me. I want to be here to help you deal with this. There's no promises in that statement around I am going to. There's no we will fix this. An acknowledgement, something like that looks like it hurts, or I can see that you're really upset. I can imagine that this is really difficult. Thank you for feeling safe to share that. Or I'm here and I can see that you feel distressed. It's the acknowledgement.
Yeah, thank you. And you don't have to have all the answers, right? It's the
No.
interest in the young person and the curiosity. I think it's an overused word, but I think as a stance around help me to understand what's going on and what I can do for
There
you.
is a message. There is a message there.
Yeah.
Like with any behaviour we'd see in our classrooms, it's just something that we feel is really confronting.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you.
Can
Paula,
I?
yeah, go, Meg, go.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, I love these two terms, I guess, for an approach is non-blaming and respectful curiosity. I just wanted to add those.
Yeah, they're nice. Thank you. Paula, welcome. I feel like you're sitting there.
No, I'm very intently listening.
Yeah, get your feet wet. I'd love to hear from you. One of the other most dominant questions or themes of questions coming through is families. And I feel like I'm throwing this one to you, maybe off script a little bit, but I think we have talked around it. But any strategies, again, language, what's the best way to engage parents and speak to parents about their children if they're not interested, if they're resistant, if you think they're going to be angry about it, all those things that Hannah's just been talking about that you don't want to do as an educator. Any tips for engaging parents in these conversations?
I think Hannah raised some really great points, which I guess could be similar tips for families and parents as well. But acknowledging that, yeah, it is a really difficult topic, and it's going to be quite emotive as well. So I guess as educators, when you're speaking to families or parents about concerns of their young person's behaviour, would that be self-harm in this instance, kind of going into that conversation knowing that it is going to be fairly tricky, but again, don't feel like you need to have all the answers, because I can tell you right now that even as professionals, different circumstances, different scenarios, even if we've all had many young people over our time working professionally that have self-harmed, yeah, I can tell you now that each of those different young people had a completely different set of scenarios and situations personally. So it's never going to be a one size fits all. So acknowledging that you have concerns and that having that empathetic ear, being willing to listen, and being willing to really understand potentially what that family situation is and what they're going through. So you may be surprised to find out, or maybe not, that maybe having these conversations with families, this information might not necessarily be new to them. They may have an inkling that something's not right with a young person, and obviously they're really well placed to know that too, being in that really close family relationship. So you may find some mutual ground there, if there's, I guess, replicated concerns from yourself as an educator and also the family. But similarly speaking, there may not be either. So that conversation you might be bringing something new to the table that they may not be aware of. And so knowing that that is an emotional topic, and looking after yourself around that, and never feeling like you're alone in that either. So I guess my advice to educators would be, if you're feeling like this is something that's really burdensome, please do feel feel free to reach out. And that could be with a supportive colleague. It might be so you're not holding all that risk yourself, or not holding all that information and that relationship yourself. It's a shared care arrangement with the school and the family and the young person. And if that, for a lot of people that will go a long way, but if it doesn't and you're still feeling personally impacted by your work, there's absolutely no shame at all in seeking professional support as well. So for educators and people in the workplace, that often can be like your employee assistance program. I imagine most schools will have something like that set up that employees can confidentially access and talk to someone professionally around what they're experiencing. And so it goes hand in hand, I guess, in terms of our stance around wanting to establish a mentally healthy community and school culture where it's okay to speak up and it's okay to help seek. And in fact, that can be a real sign of strength and a positive. And as an educator and as an adult in that circumstance, what a great sort of role modeling you can do to model that kind of self-care as well for young people. So I know you're all logged on today because you're interested in this space. Hopefully you are looking at strategies from a whole school perspective as well. So if you're thinking about it in that lens, that also makes sense to be able to try and work on a systems level and also at an individual and family level.
I think it's really interesting, there's parallels across all the different levels out there in terms of self-care and looking after yourself and so forth, and young people can't self-soothe or regulate until they are taught the skills to do so. You don't come out of the womb with those skills, and so self-harm can often be an indication of a deficit in that space, that you don't actually know when things are really tough how to start feeling or to stop feeling distress, and that goes across, as we said, all levels. The other thing, and I'm wondering, Paula, can families feel shame about it as well? We talked about young people feeling shame. Yeah.
There's
So
definitely a
they might be aware,
stigma.
but they might be embarrassed that, I don't know, that it reflects on their parenting or something if their young person's engaging in this behaviour.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, that can be quite a common reaction, and it can be quite shocking, particularly like I said before, if this is new to them or they hadn't had any kind of awareness, because we know that young people can be, quite secretive with this kind of behaviour. So it may be a shock to them, and it's okay if that's the case. So taking some time to process your own emotion, and I really like what you said just now, Nicola. It reminded me of something that actually I pulled up a quote today as a point to kind of come back to around what we've been discussing, emotional regulation, and that being a learned skill, is that remembering that the healthy expression of emotion is the goal for everyone involved with the young person, not just the young person themselves.
Nice.
And I really liked that, and I think it is something that we can all strive to do better with when it comes to regulating our emotions. And for young people that are self-harming, unfortunately, that has been their learnt behaviour over time, is to manage really distressing emotions. And that's, but we know that over time, if there's willingness to change, that we can definitely learn other ways to manage and process our really challenging emotions. And how better to do that as adults, to model that to young people as well.
I like it. It's like the collaborative problem solving. When I was learning about that, it was my favourite notion of young people. This was in the space of trauma-informed schooling, but the same stuff. So kids' behaviour, if their behaviour, as we said, everything they do is communication. It's often a lack of skill, not a lack of will. So it's a skills deficit in being able to concentrate or to feel safe or to express their emotions in a way that is more acceptable, not willfully wanting to be the most distressed kid in the class or the most disruptive or the most so it's actually a skills deficit, which when we frame it like that, we often feel like we know what to do as adults. Oh, I can work with you if I just, if this is actually something that I can help you with. Thank you, guys. I'm just aware this is a great topic. I'm going to dive a little bit into what we can do. So we talked about that, Paul. I'm going to come back to you, Meg.
Yeah.
What can we do? So we've talked about it being, self-harm, people engage in it for a whole range of reasons. Are there common threads, though, in terms of how we can support young people to move on and find alternate strategies than self-harming?
Yeah, certainly. I think I'll just want to reiterate my point around, as much as we might like a young person to cease that behaviour immediately once we become aware of it, that's not I guess it's the long-term aim, yes, but it's unrealistic to expect that every young person will be able to do that immediately. So in saying that, I think our first aim will be a harm minimisation approach. And what I mean by that is thinking about how can we reduce harm. So there's many parts to that. One might be around how do we take care of injuries or wounds? How do we ensure that any things that we might be using to cause injury are disinfected and clean, that we might be thinking about education. So talking with a young person about, you know, what function does this play in their life? What role does it play? And what other coping strategies do they have that we might be able to bolster? Who are their key supports? Essentially, we're looking at safety planning and building in those key supports into that process.
And does the educator do that though, Meg, or is that the role of other professionals to kind of do that safety planning?
So I would certainly think that would be a wellbeing staff member in a school system. So potentially in a government school, maybe a guidance officer. In a private school, maybe a school psychologist. So I would think that could be the role of that wellbeing staff member, but also that could also be the role of a clinician. If a young person is willing to engage with a clinician or an external mental health provider, then they might actually be the one who's best placed to do safety planning with a young person. And then it would always be encouraged to have good information sharing processes in place with schools.
That was going to be my
Being
question.
mindful of confidentiality, sorry.
Yeah, sure. So Hannah, how can educators know what to do then? How do they intersect with these safety plans? What's the link there?
I think that's a really important point, is having, as part of developing that plan, and whoever the main person is they're developing it, so let's say it's the school psychologist or the counsellor, the external psychologist, to make sure that the lines of communication are open so that the educators know as much as they need to know, and it might not need to be everything, but then that they know what the plan is if a young person is still self-harming or self-harms in the class or is showing wounds or discloses further injuries, that taking your point, Meg, you know, that we can't cease this, quite often can't cease this behaviour immediately, is around, okay, what steps does the clinician or the parents or carers feel needs to happen? So do I need to let somebody know? So young person has shown me further injuries, or let me know. And I should, as an educator, as part of this plan, is around, okay, are there any additional steps that I need? So do I need to let parents know? You know, is there a conversation or something that I can be part of? So it's really important that when we do our safety plan, that the educator is included in, if they come across information, what do they need to do from there? Absolutely.
And certainly when I've worked with young people in schools and it's worked well, it's that sharing which is around empowering the young person to use their other strategy. You know,
Absolutely.
you know, because part of the training, the support is that training oneself to notice, the distress earlier on, so you can activate stuff. So working in that team can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I do, you know, if our young person can feel that they can say, you know, Hannah, this has been a really, really tough day for me. Last night I'd self-injured again. I'd hurt myself last night. Today's a really tough day. Can I have 10 minutes of this time? And this is with secondary age kids. I need to go for a walk. I need to do some colouring in. Can I listen to my, I was going to say iPod. That shows my age, doesn't it? You know, can I listen to music while we're doing this work in class? Because these are, get my Walkman out. I need these to be the strategies that are going to help me. So yes, they've felt safe to tell me about what's happening for them. They might have accessed other supports. They might say, today I'm going to see one of the clinicians at school, or I've got an appointment, or mum knows, or the GP knows. But here are the other things I'd also like to try, and that might be stuff that you, as an educator, you can be really well placed to notice. We're very good at noticing the things that work for kids. I want to kind of come at this with the strengths basics. We know the things that kids are really good at. And so you might say, hey, I've noticed that, you know, you're really into your music. Would that be one of the things that could help? Because when our young people are distressed, and they clearly are if they're self-harming, we could help with those suggestions, because they might not be able to access them at this stage. So, you know,
no one
you
can.
do love
when you're distressed, you can't access your frontal lobe, so you can't remember any of the strategies that work. So you need to be reminded.
as an educator, sometimes you can feel really powerless, can't you? That, you know, I just want this to stop. I want this young person not to hurt themselves. So if we can feel useful somehow in saying, I could help you, you know, I know this can't stop immediately, but here are some other things that I've noticed you've done to calm yourself, that can help you to feel useful as an educator.
And it could be running up to the front office and delivering some notes and taking a long walk back. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be super clinical or difficult, does it? It's
It
the kind
doesn't.
of circuit
It
breaker.
doesn't.
I'm going
It
to ask a
doesn't.
really quick one to whoever wants to cover it, and then I want to dive into younger kids. Wounds. What does it mean? Should we ask them to, lots of questions. Do we ask kids to cover up? What does it mean if they don't cover them up? Is it a good sign? Is it a bad sign? Who wants to take that one on? I'm looking at Paula.
Okay. It's a very difficult one to answer because, again, like, it's so individualized, and I feel like there's not one size fits all or one rule that applies to all. So there's a few things to consider here. I feel personally, for me, there's a difference between, I guess, like, when I'm thinking about the wound healing process. So there's a difference between fresh wounds that are needing to be dressed, I guess, and they're still in an active phase of healing, versus those that might be have healed and it's more like scar tissue, or it might be, you know, you can still see the faint remains of a scar that will fade over time. So obviously, that makes a difference, because it'll make a difference to the physical appearance of the wound and where that's placed. I'm thinking here, as an example, we're talking about like the forearm and things. So, you know, a jumper might cover that up at school, or it may not, depending if it's summer, if it's short sleeves, those sorts of things. So I guess, look, you know, some degree of openness in terms of an educator being able to discuss this with the student, that self-harm is really needed, I guess, in this case, because you'll need to try and understand where that young person is coming from. And you'll also want to, I guess, be able to have hopefully an open and an understanding conversation about why this might be particularly tricky. And what I'm getting at here is that when young people are showing their self-harming scars, obviously it can be something that other young people will pick up on, and there'll be some natural curiosity, or there might be some comments made, you know, what happened to your arm? Have you been cutting yourself? You know, what's happening there? Because we know that young people really like to talk. And peers are obviously really important to their friendships and their general sense of well-being as well, wanting to be accepted and all that sort of stuff. So in terms of there being a blanket rule, I guess, you know, that's going to come down to each individual school and our own policy. But my, I guess, take-home message with that would be, try and be open as much as possible to understanding what is happening for that young person and what their preferences are. So even if that doesn't at the end of the day align with the school's policy around covering up or not covering up the injury, at least you'll be able to invite some openness around why that's actually happening. And that goes a long way to validating that person's distress and why they might be actually self-harming in the first place. But we also understand that, you know, visible scars for others can spark, you know, some curiosity. And also we're trying to, where possible, I guess, minimize the exposure for other young people, because it can be distressing to see scars, open scars, and there might be some questioning around that. But I also wanted to mention that, you know, and this is something that probably usually takes place after a bit of time and space from I guess, recovering from self-harm, so to speak. So perhaps that young person has worked really hard on coming on up with alternative strategies to their self-harming, and it might be something that they're not actively doing anymore, but the scars might still remain. So also acknowledging that for that young person, that might actually be a marker of success, so to speak, or how far they've come in their recovery journey. So we don't want to minimize that either, because that's often going to be really tied up with that person's sense of identity, and it might add to some of that stigma around there being shame attached to self-harm. So acknowledge it's a really tricky space, and I probably haven't given you a clear answer, but I hope I've at least bring a few things to think about when we're addressing the young person, but we're also addressing it from a school's perspective as well, in terms of policies and things like that.
I think your answer is great, Paula, because I think it's the right one, which is it depends. And the other thing I would add is, I mean, I certainly had young people who to attend a swimming carnival in year 10 when they haven't done the whole time because they were too embarrassed by their scars and wounds was a major event in their life. However, they were also open to a conversation, which that might impact other young people. So we also have to give young people credit that if we speak to them about these things, that we're really glad for you that this feels like a success, but in this setting, we're a bit concerned about X, Y, or Z. So we've got to give young people credit too, that they will have conversations and they will be concerned about other people, so we can have conversations. There is one question, I think there is a straight yes or no answer to it. I'm going to answer it. One of the questions says, if we suspect a young person is self-harming and they're wearing long sleeves under their uniform, should we demand they pull up their sleeves? No. We do not do that. That is not going to get us anywhere. How would you feel if somebody did that to you? So I think that's the question comes from a place of distress. Yeah, it comes from us going, what if we need to know what's our duty of care? What should we need? And I've had lots of young people have those experiences. Why are you wearing that? It's boiling hot outside. You know, take that jumper off. Do this, do that. No, that's going to push people away and leave them on their own.
Yeah, quite intrusive, I think. It's quite an intrusive thing to do, and not giving the young person any agency.
No, that's right. But much better to say, I'm concerned about you. Can we have a chat? Yeah.
I think one of the things that is, I guess, going away from here for educators is to really make sure that their understanding of what the school's policy is, or if they're a department school, what the department's policy is. And for school leaders who are here today, I think it's really important to start thinking about what needs you might have identified around staff training. So one of the most important things that can come out of this is helping your staff to understand about self-harm. So from this, how are you going? What further training can you access for your staff? Who might need a bit more of an in-depth training? And what, for the majority of our educator population, what general mental health literacy training can we have? So there might be layers of depth around what different parts of your staff may need to access, but having a chance to really have a think about your school's policy so that you're clear on who does what and what happens.
Thank you. I'm going to dip into, I want to make sure we cover off two key areas. So one, maybe we can cover off succinctly if possible, is risk of contagion. Meg, are you happy to chat to that quickly? Is it catching?
Yeah.
Does self-harm of one young person lead to increases in self-harm in other young people?
So we know that exposure to self-harm in others, whether that be family or friends, does increase the risk of self-harm in adolescents. We know that. And we also know that's particularly true for young females and for cutting. There's various reasons for that. The obvious one is that they are drawn to each other through shared experience, the ability to relate to one another. Potentially there's an element of experimentation during adolescence, or being accepted into a peer group. But what I just wanted to end with is it's a behaviour. So for it to become a pattern of behaviour, it needs to serve a function or meet a need. So there may be, I guess, a point of experimentation for some young people, but unless it serves a function in terms of coping with a challenge they're experiencing, it won't become a pattern or recurrent.
Yeah, it's true. I've heard lots of young people that say they tried it, it didn't work. Well, good, yeah. Primary school age children. This is one we've had lots of questions about chatter. So maybe just leaning into it this way and then we'll get a bit more in depth into it. But primary school educators that are tuning in today, if they hear kids talking about self-harm or suspecting that other kids, how do we intervene? What do we do? What should be our response is it any different in a primary school setting than it would be in a high school setting for just that bit to start off with? And kind of the kids on the playground or kids in class chatting about self-harm.
I mean, I've got something.
Yeah, go, Meg.
Oh, I just wanted to say, for me, all discussion of self-harm should be redirected to a one-on-one space. It's not appropriate to intervene or have group discussions about self-harm because that does increase exposure and therefore risk. So, yeah, definitely redirecting to a one-on-one space. And in a primary school setting, for me, I think that parent or carer involvement is essential. It's developmentally unusual for that age, even though it is increasing in prevalence anecdotally. But yeah, we certainly would need to see the family as a key support and also part of the management plan.
Yeah, I think we've already mentioned that the self-harm equals distress in the adults that realise that young people are engaging in it, never more so in younger kids. I think all of us are aware of that. We get contacted about it. You hear about it in professional development. There's kind of a younger and younger people getting really, really distressed at young kids engaging in these behaviours. Paula, what can we do? Is there different approaches for working? Meg's talked about some of them. I think that redirecting in one-on-one conversation is a great one. She mentioned families. Can you elaborate on that and how you might work with a young person in primary school who might be talking about engaging in self-harm or engaging in self-harm?
Well, I think it's probably not. I mean, obviously, we need to be sensitive to the younger age, but it's not, from an educator's perspective, I wouldn't think as too different to what you would do in a secondary school, because as Meg had previously mentioned, any talk or witnessing of scarring or suspicions of self-harm needs to always be taken seriously. So having some further conversation around that, but with a family around what can they do to support their young person. And I imagine, particularly because it is obviously a younger cohort that we're talking about, getting some professional help would probably be one of the key things that would be discussed or encourage. I mean, we can't force families to do that, obviously, but encouraging that. So as a school, can be really handy to know what other local agencies and services are out there that you could potentially refer to or give information about. And again, being that source of information, so you can equip yourself with the right tools and information about self-harm. So even coming along today, getting a basic understanding is going to go a long way to be able to have those or increase your confidence to have those conversations with families. So I guess I encourage people to keep being curious, keep finding out information. After today, there's some great fact sheets that have just been developed on the BU website actually about help seeking, and how to actually navigate the mental health system. So if that's something that you want to learn more about, because let's face it, like a lot of healthcare systems, it does change quite constantly. So having your head around that, even just from a basic perspective around, what would your first point of call be? So for example, a family might want to take their young person or their child to a family doctor or a GP for an initial assessment, some further professional support, and then from there, further referrals might be made to other local agencies that are specialised more in mental health. But that can often be a good place to start, and even just having a general awareness. So for example, that children as well as adults are obviously entitled to a mental health care plan from a GP as well, which allows them Medicare rebated sessions with a professional mental health worker. So just having some basic knowledge can be really helpful and powerful too. So don't assume that, even if it seems like common knowledge to a lot of people, that this might be the first time that I've actually ever had to actively seek mental health support. So it's a whole new kind of world and system to have to navigate sometimes, which can be a little bit confronting and
daunting, for sure.
Daunting at first,
particularly for little kids. I think primary school age kids. The good thing to say is that it can be well managed. I think that's another really good message. The other thing, we're really almost out of time. It's gone really fast. Is one of the things about kids talking to other kids. I think one of the really important things that we talked about in setting this up was thanking the child and letting them let go of the responsibility. So if a young primary school age kid tells you as an educator or an adult that Joey is hurting himself, thank you so much for letting me know. We're going to take care of it. We're going to take care of him, and checking in with them and making sure they're okay, but being very deliberate and specific that this is no longer their burden to hold. And I would say that goes up through adolescence as well, but particularly in primary school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last couple of minutes. Last couple of things we haven't got to say. Go, Hannah.
Sorry. I think not making assumptions about the young person, whether it's primary or secondary school. And I think about following up, we talk about this chatter, particularly if we're hearing it in primary schools, follow up on the rumours. So if someone's saying, I saw this or I heard this or this is happening on social media, we have to follow that up, I think is, we can't leave it be. And I know that for some educators, what you might be dealing with is parents who are coming and saying, my young person isn't self-harming, but they're seeing their friends are self-harming. And I think it's really about you know, young teenagers particularly can be really cross with us when we have to raise this with other young people's parents, and making sure that you're emphasising to young people, if they share concerns about their friends, is there some things that they can't keep confidential. Yes, they might be really angry, you know, so your friends might be angry that you've told someone about this, but you've actually come from a place of caring. I think is, you know, there's some things we can't keep to ourselves. They're too big, and this young person needs further assistance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really, and they get it. They get it. They get cranky, but they get it because it shows care. It shows care. Meg, any last 30 seconds? Anything you really wanted to say that we haven't had a chance to say? Go.
Yeah,
So
look,
fast.
super quick. Also, parents should be taken seriously. Give a young person agency. Help them make an informed decision about their actions, about, you know, whether they expose others to that, they share information. Help them make an informed choice. So they, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And Paula, some last thoughts
Yeah,
to leave us
sure.
with?
There was still some things that, yeah, we didn't get to, which is totally fine
Mm.
as things happen. But I guess my final message would be to don't forget yourself in all this. So make sure you actively look after yourself, because obviously we are talking about a topic that can be distressing, and you know, it is important that, no, it's a bit cliche, but you know, obviously you can't fill from an empty cup. So make sure that you are taking time out from your work life to try and get that balance. And if you're noticing that that's running low, you know, have a few key things that you can go to, like you would encourage a young person. We talked earlier about, you know, what would be some other activities that we could do to kind of either use as a bit of a distraction or to use as another way of processing difficult emotion until that kind of dissipates. Well, it's the same for us. You know, if we're noticing our stress levels are increasing, what are those warning signs that we might not be coping so well? And if so, what are some things that we can actively put in place? And I know that in these times, particularly as you mentioned at the beginning, Nicola, about the rough sort of 12 months plus that we've all had, it's easier said than done, but you know, we can be that great role model for young people and children too. So let's start with ourselves and go from there.
Excellent point, Paula. We didn't get to everything. We will send out the Q&As for any key topics that we thought we haven't covered in when we review the questions. But I want to thank our panelists. It felt like a flying start, and it went super quick. I really enjoyed the conversation. I thought it was fantastic to hear from all of your perspectives. It could have gone on for another hour. But thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Paula. It's done, and you can relax now. I want to thank everybody who's joined us. We had over 900 participants, which is amazing. We have got resources coming through that we've recommended, both BU resources and external resources, which you will see on the coming slides. As we've talked about, BU offers a whole range of resources and supports, from programs directory to consultants to implementation to suicide prevention and postvention work. So I encourage you to check it out and be in touch if you have any further questions. The resources, as I said, the BU resources and the subsequent resources, external resources from other agencies, including some apps, is available in a list in the resources, and will be sent out as well with the information pack. You can learn more about BU. To register, visit our website or follow our socials, and you'll be across our different settings, early learning, primary and secondary schools as well. And finally, I want to thank you all for coming. I encourage you to finish, complete the survey. It really helps us. It'll pop up at the end of the session. We really encourage your feedback. We want to make these sessions as useful as possible. I know it feels rushed at the end. We just wanted to get the content out there. So you will get an email with the link of the certificate of participation, the webinar resources, recording, FAQs, so on and so forth. So other than that, please visit our website for further resources. Otherwise, thank you and take care.